Welcome back to the Grid Talk podcast. This is episode 175. My name is Tom Horrox, and today we are privileged to have with us for a fireside chat Richard Reddy, aka Spanners from Missed Apex podcast. Welcome to Fireside, Spanners.
Ooh, a privilege, is it, Tom? How very fancy. I feel honoured. Thanks for the invite.
No problem, it's our pleasure. So those of you who are new to Grid Talk, please make sure you subscribe to us on YouTube and click the bell so you know when we've gone live, and don't forget to give us a thumbs up. If you enjoy the show, please leave us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts and on Spotify, as that really helps us out as well. But back to our guest today. Spanners, you obviously run the Missed Apex podcast. Anyone who listens to any F1 podcast surely would know that, as it's definitely the piece de resistance of Formula One podcasts in my mind.
Of independent ones.
Maybe, independent.
Yeah, I'm quite proud of the company that we're in. You know, we tend to sort of be in the top 100 of UK sports on iTunes, and you look around and it's like really big organisations like WTF1 and obviously Checker Flag are right there at the top. But to be in and around that area, I think it's only like us and maybe for F1's sake in there. So it does feel like we're in a funny position. And you saying there, oh, anyone who does F1 podcasts might have heard of you guys. You're sat in a shed making shows. You've got no idea how well known you are, out and about. But, we do get some nice feedback. And I posted recently that I think we've got to the position where people will reply to our emails, like people in and around F1. The reply is still no, but at least we're getting a reply more and more. So I think like we're at a position where people are like, they might have heard of us enough to go, I best reply to them, but no thanks.
Well, that's definitely the point where we all want to get to, so we can be rejected by the Formula One
exactly.
top brass.
Yeah.
So I'd love to know, like, as a fan of Missed Apex myself, I'd love to know where it all kind of started for you and where the love from F1 came from. And if you can remember, what was the first time you remember, that is Formula One?
Oh, Nigel Mansell. I don't want to tell tales on age. How old are you, Tom?
Well, my earliest motorsport memory is Nigel Mansell, so you're all right.
He was definitely the first one. I remember my dad, like a lot of us, we sit down and we watch sports with dad, and my dad was obsessed with sports and reading. I'm not one for reading, really. So to spend time with my dad, it was sit down and watch sports, and the choice was rugby league. Awful game, pointless. No one knows the rules, not even the referee. I used to when DVRs or whatever came out, the whistle would go and I'd pause it and I'd go, right, tell me what's happening. You've been watching this game 20, 30 years. Tell me what the decision's going to be. He never had a clue. No one does. It's made up. The other one he was obsessed with was superbikes and MotoGP, and I never got to grips with those. Yeah, of course, it's really amazing what those guys do. They lean over, they don't fall down, so there's a little bit of magic and lack of physics involved there.
Definitely magic.
They should fall down. And that's what I'm saying. But I never really enjoyed the racing of MotoGP. It felt like they were kind of ghosting past each other a little bit. But sitting down and watching a Grand Prix where, and back in those days, people complain about lack of overtaking now. My goodness, in those days, it really was occasionally lap one was the only lap where anything would happen. With Formula One, even you were waiting for something to happen, and genuinely sometimes lap one was the only time that anything happened. And so you would settle in and you would really get into the strategy of it, watch like a hawk that one little timing bar that you used to have at the bottom, and try and work out over 2 hours what was going to happen. And I found that much more of an event than the kind of the quick smash and grab entertainment of superbikes and MotoGP, and just to sit down and absorb Formula One and bathe in it. Like nothing had to happen really, particularly for that to be enjoyable. And it often didn't. And nothing has happened for the whole race. And sometimes you're sitting there and you're going, well, is an engine going to blow? Oh, the Ferrari engine did blow. Of course, on tracks like the old Hockenheim, where they used to disappear in the forest and they'd be at full pelt. And occasionally, the engines would just completely give up with those old telltale big plumes of smoke that you used to get from the engine failures. And so, for me, Formula One was more of a, it's a place to go to than any particular event. I don't think I've really missed a race since like 1986 because it's just such a part of my calendar. So with modern F1, when people are complaining about lack of overtaking, I mean, for me, in the 2000s, early 2000s, we had loads of great racing, loads of good battles. But even 2017, 2018, where the Ferraris were up there a little bit, there was good racing up and down the grid. 2013, I know Red Bull and Vettel dominated, but But all down that grid, with Hamilton in his McLaren scrapping with Hulkenberg every other race, there was really good racing. So for me, modern racing has gotten better and better. And then it's mad to see the kids coming up, like complaining about Paul Ricard. I don't know if you remember, there was one organisation just kicked off because there was one boring race at Paul Ricard. It was like, F1's dead. Oh my goodness. There was one race where nothing much happened. And I was like, it was still it was still F1. And the thing is, we're in a minority now, us old sweats that remember those days, with the Americans taking over, really, and obviously what that happened last season. Like, definitely there is an impatience to deliver that showdown event every single race. It's got to be 23 Super Bowls a year. That's what Liberty Media said. I was like, no, it's got to be rubbish for ages. And then when it is really good, you get to really enjoy it. But I appreciate that, I'm a bit of a dinosaur like that.
Well, it's just a lot like, you see that a lot in football as well, don't you? You have lots of 0-0s and 1-0s. And I remember my local club going to a game and it was the most entertaining 0-0 draw I ever saw in my life. And then there were 2 goals in injury time to finish 1-1. So it was, it's kind of...
But I want to see the game played well, the sport sported well. And sometimes if you sports as well as you can, that's not always interesting every single time. Like, if you just go about and set about your task because you've got to get a 0-0 against Leyton Orient to stay in League Division 2, sometimes you've got to park the bus and that's how you play the game. As long as you haven't got a game that's fundamentally garbage and nothing's ever going to happen, like rugby league, then you're all right. But if you've got an organic space where things can happen, you have to accept that sometimes nothing's going to happen. That's part of it. Sometimes it's going to be spectacular. Sometimes nothing's going to happen. If you fix it so it's spectacular every time, it's special none of the time. And apologies to those clouds I've been yelling at for the last 5 minutes.
No, you're echoing pretty much everything that I say as well. You can tell we're similar ages in that sense.
Grumpy old man.
I will caveat, I think I'm probably just a couple of years younger than yourself. So,
okay, 41. 41. Let's put...
Oh, wow, yeah, 40. Okay, so...
Okay, well, I'm insulted. But anyway, carry on.
Okay, so what would you say then would be... You say you look back at the previous years of Formula One and how you got into it when it wasn't so exciting.
Yeah.
Do you prefer it when it is now, or do you prefer it in the past, or what's your favourite era?
There's obviously a balance to that, isn't there? And so the era that I probably have most memories of is actually the Damon Hill era. And looking back, maybe Damon Hill wasn't the superstar that I was emotionally invested that he was in the mid 90s. And then you get your hero. He was absolutely robbed by the cheating of Michael Schumacher. I'm happy to say that. You can say allegedly if you want. And then watching him pick up that title, and then the heroic kind of struggles at Arrows, and because you get your hero, but then the reality was actually he wasn't that wanted at Williams. He wasn't really a top tier driver of that generation. So he's probably doing well to get a big money deal, I assume, at Arrows. And then, but then at Arrows, he got that second place, didn't he, at Hungary? And I remember watching that race and that being quite glorious. And yeah, so that was probably my biggest first fandom was Damon Hill, which is, looking back, I would go, that's not what I would pick now. But yeah, so it went kind of beg your pardon, anyone but Schumacher. Yep. Mansell, then in that kind of Senna era, of course, Senna was majestic, glory hunting with Damon Hill, but that's not the best racing, really. I think if you look at the early 2000s with Hakkinen and Coulthard, a lot of that was a good balance between excitement on track and it not being kind of for the show. That felt fairly pure. The early 2000s was great, and if it wasn't for the Mercedes domination, there's been, I think, good racing in recent years. Like I said, 2017, 2018 was pretty good. What I don't like is last season, because I really, really feel that racing, and because I'm a Hamilton fan, this is going to come across as me just being sore, but I was saying this mid-season as well, I didn't think it was good racing. Like, if you look at Hamilton versus Perez at one of the tracks, they were going wheel to wheel, multiple corner racing, it was great. Every time Verstappen and Hamilton came close on track together, and I'm not saying whose fault is what or anything, but every time they came on track together, it was a collision or they left the track. And it wasn't penalised because I believe the reason it wasn't penalised was not some grand conspiracy against Lewis Hamilton. It's because they needed to keep the entertainment going. If they'd have penalised Max Verstappen for everything they should have penalised him for, and yes, I know Netherlands, 50G, Silverstone, 50G in the hospital, yeah, that one thing. Okay, if he was penalised for everything he should have been, the title wasn't going down to Abu Dhabi. The brake check in Saudi was absolutely ridiculous, but they couldn't penalise it because Hamilton was dominant for those last 4 races. If you'd penalised Verstappen, then you ruin your showdown. And so the actual rules and the way they were enforced all throughout the season had the show and the finale and keeping the season ticking over in mind. So this kind of tipped over too far. But yeah, to answer the question, if anyone can remember it, I think the sweet spot of the racing there was probably, I don't know, 2003. We've had a good decade and a half after that of really good racing, amazing machines, top class drivers, because the driver standards there are much, much better than 80s, 90s driver standards. If they weren't, then there's something wrong and the sport's been standing still. And even with driver standards, I feel like we peaked a few years back and now we're kind of getting bogged down in billionaires going up the grid. And so it's going to be billionaires and children of F1 drivers. So yeah, so that's it. I think we've had a peak, and I think we're just in danger of going into a dip at the moment.
Excellent. Yeah, I have to admit as well, I did credit you, but I did use one of your comments from an episode a couple of days ago, which was about pay drivers and the difference between someone who's paid to be there and because of who they are and not what they can do. And I think that's a really that really resonates with me as a really, really good way of describing it. Yeah,
because there's always the argument they go, oh, well, everyone's a pay driver. Even Lewis Hamilton had backing, as if to try and, like, people are so smug when they make that argument to like, everyone's a pay driver, really. No. There is a difference between someone going, we've got some money to fund a fast driver, like Carlos Slim had some money, Ron Dennis had some money, we need to find a driver, that kid from Stevenage is good, that Perez is good, he'll make a good Mexican driver, and then funding it. There's a difference between that and being deigned from birth, like a Rosberg or a Schumacher, to be a Formula One driver, or a Stroll, just to have that money because of who you are. Papa Stroll wasn't looking for someone to fund. It was always going to be for Lance Stroll. And so yes, there is a clear difference between a pay driver and a driver with backing. And when people do that, everyone's a pay driver, actually, I want to scream, Tom. I want to scream.
Yeah, just to caveat that slightly as well, I actually got in trouble once for saying that Lance Stroll is better than James Hunt, because from what you were saying before, he is, because otherwise
I don't think that's a terrible argument. The standard of driver now is so much higher than it was in the 70s. People get really angry. Okay, so I got asked on another show yesterday or Monday, who's the greatest driver of all time, and I'm like, well, it's definitely Lewis Hamilton, because he's the best driver statistically of this era, right? Even if you want to say Verstappen's better now, if you look at the last 10, 11 years, Hamilton is without a doubt the best driver of that period. And this period, the driver standards are like way higher than Schumacher's time. So you're old enough to remember basically Schumacher coming in and just beating a load of bums in F1.
Yeah.
People are going to get upset about this, but he took this kind of physical fitness, this kind of total ruthless approach to Formula One, whilst other people had a cigarette in each ear and chugging a beer. And if you look back at photos of the grid, like in the 60s compared to the grid now, which ones would you send to war, or which ones would you want to play five-a-side on your team? It's going to be the modern drivers. The standard now is so much better. So of course you can say pound for pound, was Fangio better, was Senna better pound for pound, but I'll probably go further. Lance Stroll's probably better than Ayrton Senna. But pound for pound, Senna was great in his time. But there's a quote with Ayrton Senna going around Monaco where he's like, and he had such a way with words and phrases, and he's talking about, I went out there and every single lap I felt more and more at one with the car, and I could get closer to the balls, and I just took it to places it couldn't go, and it started achieving the impossible. So no, you just took a long time to get up to the ultimate pace Whereas nowadays, modern drivers would be expected to go out on a Friday, and it's seen as a great trait of a great driver now to just get up to pace quickly. So that shows you that probably in those days, there was just a little bit more margin. There was a little bit more fat, and they didn't have the advantage of really early karting junior careers, very competitive junior careers, nutrition, a competitive junior field to have to come through. So obviously the greats from that era aren't going to match up. Actually, kind of, if you took them now and plonked them in a neutral race series, of course modern drivers are going to be better, but people get very upset, don't they? They like really like, oh, Jim Clark's definitely better than Lewis Hamilton. You go, come, no. Anyway, emails to Tom.
Yeah.
Talk.
Sort of back to the original. What I was leading on to this is about Missed Apex as well. It's great just to go off on all these tangents and everything, just talking about Formula, because it's great to hear your opinions on it, especially as they resonate very strongly with me as well. So it's great. Finally, vindication from me, from someone who knows what they're talking about.
Yes.
But so, what was it that actually made you start Missed Apex, and where on earth did you dig up Matt from?
Oh, Matt, two rumpets. So those who don't know, Matt is an American who I picked. He lives in Brooklyn. He's a trumpet player and a good one. You hear people, we call him Matt Trumpets. Yeah, I play the trumpet. And then he came over to visit. And it was 6 years of podcasting before I actually met him. And he came over, he sat with my family on the South Bank in London, and he gets the trumpet out. And he just starts absolutely in a cafe. Like, how un-British is that? In a cafe, he starts belting out this trumpet. And I'm like, oh, like you can play trumpet. My goodness. And then later at the karting event, because my wife is also a jazz singer, pianist as well. So we had this, like, after a karting event, a proper, like, gig with Matt on trumpets, wife on piano and singing. And it was just, it's incredible. So he's an amazingly talented guy, and he does a lot of blogging and stuff. But yeah, so basically we were doing a podcast for another organization, and Matt was a blogger there. And I said, right, just give me all your writers and I'll pick a few of them at a time and we'll try and make a podcast work, and I'll just rotate around the writers. But every time I just realized Matt had this ability to bounce back and forth. He understood the kind of improvisational nature of podcasting, and journalists, I think, do make great podcasters because, they have the drumbeat of knowledge in their head, like a core knowledge of current events. So that's where I picked up that American. And it's good because having an American makes it sound like you're off the telly, doesn't it? That's why whenever he's talking, I'm like, oh, it sounds like telly, this is great. It's like an American from the movies. But you were saying, well, what made me do it in the first place? Was that the question? Oh, man, I wanted to be in radio when I was a kid. And back in the olden days, so back in the 90s, I think if you didn't know anyone, if you didn't have a contact into a radio station, I don't think you'd had any chance. So I went to student radio, and it was a pretty tight bunch, and I did an audition, and they went, no, you're rubbish. I went, oh, okay. And so I took my tape, and I knocked on all the local radio stations. I was like, yeah, I've got my tape. I'd like to do presenting and stuff. Do you want to listen to my tape? Oh yeah, we'll definitely listen to your tape. And that's it. There's no other options. So I went off and did what I did and went on adventures. And then at some point at 2010, 9, 10, something like that, discover podcast. And I went, oh my goodness, I don't need anyone's permission to make this, and I can just put it on the internet. And so at that time, I think it was a lot smaller podcasting. I do remember doing a year of podcasting with about 23 downloads per show, and I'm sure they were all bots, but it was just enough to make me go, oh, there's someone out there. There's someone out there listening. So I did podcasting about parenting, about marriage, and then eventually in 2014 started doing one about Formula One.
Fantastic. And it's just the dream began there. And then so from those early moments of podcasting with your 23 listens, before you know it, I'm listening to my Checker Flag podcast, and all of a sudden I hear your voice on there.
The actual BBC one, isn't it? The actual BBC. So the BBC one, yeah, I got this phone call out of the blue, and they just were, we've had Jack Nichols on Missed Apex podcast a few times. He's been on to our karting events and stuff. And I've had him on local radio as well. I've invited him as my expert guest on local radio too. And so I had a bit of an in there, and they had not got Jolyon Palmer for one of the shows. So very, very honoured. They called me up and slot me in as imagine little me being the expert to Jolie and Palmer, because I'm not an expert and I'm not a journalist. My job is to be the useful idiot, to ask useful enough questions. So they're putting me into the expert role. Oh my goodness, Jolie and Palmer, expert role. Okay, so I'm excited. I go and do it. I'm so nervous. I got to the point where my mouth just fully dried up before waiting for the Zoom call to be answered. And I am now a professional broadcaster. I'm a professional radio presenter. Missed Apex is a couple of days' work for me. We make money from Missed Apex. Yet my mouth went dry and I felt like I could not speak, because this is the mothership. This is absolutely has been the top F1 podcast for years and years and years, probably only overtaken by Beyond the Grid. But I think it's probably still, one of the very highest. So I get on that Zoom call and then we're prepping, and then Jolie and Palmer can make it after all. So he pops up and they go, well, please, you're here. Please hang around. We've invited you. Please stay. Jolie and Palmer looks bewildered at who this random idiot is. I've never heard of me, doesn't know who I am. And he's just kind of like, he's on holiday, he's having a good time, but he's popped in just to fulfill his commitment. He's like, all right, who's this? And I could see not a contempt, but just something doesn't belong here.
And so it just completely came out of the blue because of your mutual friendship with Jack Nicholls. But how did that even...
I'd like to call it a friendship.
Okay.
Jack Nicholls will probably say Spanners is someone I'm aware of. But yeah, they obviously thought I could do a job, which was great. And I had fun. But within minutes, I got into an argument with Andrew Benson, the BBC chief F1 correspondent. Then I got into a disagreement with Jack, which is fine because we've debated before. But then I got into a disagreement with Jolie and Palmer, and he seemed genuinely offended. Like, he really thought that I was talking. I could see his face. He really was like, who's this idiot? Because I said, perhaps we're getting carried away a little bit with Lando Norris, with the Lando Norris hype. I said he's been flattered by Daniel Ricciardo struggling in a season where all the drivers who've switched cars are struggling a little bit. So that's the perfect case scenario. I named a driver who was struggling, but we know where those struggles are coming from. All the drivers except Sainz were struggling to get up to speed. And then when he got the opportunity for that race win, I can't remember where it was, in the rain. Do you remember where it was? But Turkey. So was it Sochi?
What, for Norris was this?
Yeah. Where he was leading and then he made the wrong call to stay out on the wets. And then he screamed at his team. And I said, that kind of shows that, like, he's probably not quite the finished article yet, and we shouldn't get carried away. And Jolie and Palmer got very, very upset with me and listed several reasons why I was wrong, and then did that kind of name me one time when blah, and I was like, I can't name a single time that blah, and so he sort of totally won the debate, I guess. And then I went away going, oh, everyone yelled at me on the. Do you know who was lovely? Do you know who was absolutely lovely? I'm sure they all are lovely. But Jenny Gao was just incredibly nice, welcoming on the call, follow-up messages. Did you enjoy that? All that kind of stuff. So it was a bizarre experience. I did not belong there, but I was happy to fill in and do a job, even though they didn't need me in the end. So it was all very weird and all very nice.
I was going to say, so when's your next appearance? But I'm assuming based on that, it's not going to happen.
I don't know. I'm here. If my phone's always on, I've been desperately waiting the entire time. I feel like, you get a shot like that and you just enjoy it. That's the thing, is you got to remember to enjoy these things, because you don't know when they're going to come along. But really, I didn't belong there. The only way you'd have someone like me on there would be as a host, because that's my job, is I'm a host and a presenter. But to have me in there as a subject matter expert and go, right, argue with ex-Formula One driver Jolie and Palmer, the actual BBC F1 commentator Jack Nicholls, and also the chief correspondent Andrew Benson. Go, have fun. That was a bit rough.
So I was going to ask you a couple of things about your podcasting history, about what has probably been your favourite moment in podcasting history. And I was also going to ask about what would be like your least favourite moment, but I'm considering maybe that might be.
No, they were great. They were great. I tell you what, there's so much variety with Missed Apex with our panel, that it's the learning, and to me it's when you're like karting or on a sim track and you're just eating away at your lap time trying to get that corner closer, hit the apex more, get on the power earlier. I feel like that with the art of podcasting and programming. Every show I want to present better. I want to get the sound slightly better in between shows. Every year we want to have better graphics, better guests, gamify growing the audience and stuff like that. So for me, that's the best bit about podcasting. It's just a ridiculous challenge I should never have taken on 12 years ago. It was a very bad idea.
Well, it certainly seems to be working out for you anyway. Yeah, should we talk about a little bit about Formula One as well, as we're cars are literally on track as we speak. Heads up to the audience, we are recording this on the 10th of March, so we are going to be airing it next week, just before the start of the new season. So as we stand, we've a few hours ago we saw the very radical new Mercedes and their sidepod design. So what's I know you're not a tech expert, but what's your initial thoughts on what
okay, so you're right, I'm not an F1 tech expert, but I do actually have a background in engineering. I was an electronics tech, and then I worked in the design phase in defense, so in weapons design. The clever people who went to university would design electronics, and they would then put them in a missile or a launch or something, and I would explain to them the various ways in which that would be abused and not work in the real world. So, I'd say, look, see that platform that you've got there, and that's delicate and it's not supporting any weight. Guarantee your squaddy is going to use that to stand on and reach that thing, and it will disappear. That thing will cook and overheat because you've not considered the thermal mapping. The battery will run out well before. How are you going to replace that? When that bit breaks, because I know that bit breaks all the time, how are you going to get to it? So that was my job, is supportability. So I do have a little bit of an engineering background with stuff like this. So what always bugs me as a Mercedes fan looking in from the outside is they always seem to have an allergy to cooling. They never want to they always run the cooling very, very close. And they've had times in tracks like Singapore where you've seen them just with bolt cutters, like just having to hack bits out of the bodywork just to get the heat out of there. And this is actually very typical of these kind of engineers. So defense and F1 share a lot of engineers. So, I'm very familiar with this kind of person. And whenever you talk to them about cooling, they don't want to know. They don't want to consider that. They always want to look at performance. So with the Mercedes sidepod, the sidepod is basically where they house the radiators. The heat from everywhere else in the car is going to the sidepod, blow air through that, and I hope I'm not oversimplifying it, blow through air through that, and then that allows it to draw more heat out. So with Mercedes, they've said there's no sidepod. It's not quite true from what I can see. It looks like they've got a very squashed sidepod, and they had an open panel, and you could still see it was jam-packed with the radiator fins, whereas if they opened a hatch on the Aston Martin, and in the sidepod, you could see a lot of space. There was a lot of space. There was radiators, and there was a lot of space up front. So for them, the pod was serving an aerodynamic function, whereas for the Mercedes, they're like, no, we don't want it to serve. We want it to just be as small as possible and just absolutely pack it in. But I bet with that philosophy, there will be cooling compromises somewhere down the road. There we go. Is that boring enough? Was that techie enough for you, Tom?
It's good. I'm impressed. But I noticed earlier they were actually taping up part of the louvers on the back, which tells me that maybe they're trying to run it as hot as possible to maybe kind of see if this does happen later on. But if this turns out to be the double diffuser type thing that that we feared might happen, what do you think Formula One will do about that? Can you see them as just saying no, you can't run that, or do you see this playing out for a year? Or
so this is interesting. Ross Brawn made a comment in the off season where they said if someone finds a loophole, we think we've identified the loophole. If we find a loophole, we have things in place that will allow us to move quicker to close it, basically, and to bring that back. And if they're talking within a season, I can see that. I can see that can be okay, like they did with DAS. The DAS system, and they said, okay, well done. You did find the loophole, but by the end of the season, we want it to go. I think that's okay. If they start nerfing things that are legal and just saying, right, you just can't use that anymore because it's too good, then that defeats the whole point of the sport, doesn't it? If someone does their blown diffuser, if they just said to Brawn in 2008, oh, that double diffuser, well done, but that's giving you a massive advantage. No. Kill it. It's not in the spirit or whatever. Maybe there could be a rule where they have to show their homework. So, okay, well done. You've got to start. You've got to jump on the field, but now you have to tell everyone how you did it. So maybe that could be an advantage. But I think it is right to an extent that we don't have another Mercedes turbo hybrid 3-year domination. So if you have like 2014, 2015, 2016, there's something wrong how you've either described the regulations or there's something wrong with your structuring. So there's probably both. There was probably regulations big enough to drive a hole through in the hybrid era because it was all new. Plus you had Mercedes in there with limitless resources and they threw an unprecedented amount of staff at it. And they ran it like an engineering firm, like engineering department. And you can do this with big departments where you set a requirement. Someone goes, I would like this much less weight or this much less movement. Your department, you work on that. Tell me when you've got an answer. And it's not one guy sketching at a thing trying to make it better. And this is what you can do with people power is you can just set little requirements and have teams. And this is probably the key. You can have teams afford to fail doing it as well. So you can have 5 teams working on a thing and only one of them comes up with the solution. So clearly that situation is wrong. So we've got to try. So that you got the cost cap and then hopefully tighter regulations being overseen. And I think I like what the FIA are doing here, which is they are involved with the team. It doesn't just come out of the box finished. They're involved. They can ask questions. They can say, what are you doing there? So it's not a surprise to them when it comes out. So there's a balance to be struck. Yeah, if they nerfed any good idea, what's the point? Just make it a spec series. But you can't repeat 2014, 2015, 2016.
Yeah, I agree. I think for me, as long as the purpose of these regulations is to stop the aero wake from interfering with the cars behind, and so long as it doesn't interfere with the aero wake, then for me, it's all fine. It's congratulations. Like you say, show everyone. They've got this tech time thing that they're doing now, isn't it? Like show and tell, where they've got to show everyone all the upgrades and stuff. Yeah. So maybe that is something that they'll do, but it is something that I don't think fundamentally people are going to be able to copy. So it seems like so long as it doesn't cause problems for the cars behind, hopefully, like from my perspective, it's going to stay, because I like to see things like that rewarded. But of course, we're saying this now, and by the time this airs, it's been completely outlawed, and Mercedes are qualifying 9th and 10th for Bahrain.
And it's just trails of fire as the whole Mercedes radiators are overheating and melting carbon fiber. It could be. It seems like everyone's convinced though that it's definitely going to be a brilliant idea.
Yeah, I mean, how can making something infinitely smaller in a sport that requires you to be, as fast through the air as possible? How can it possibly be a bad thing, provided it works? Provided it works. Yeah. So, what are you most looking forward to for the upcoming season, and what excites you about this new regulation set?
Do you know the thing that always excites me? I'll go to the regulation set in a minute, but in fact, that's probably the way to start. With the regulation set, obviously, you're hoping that they can follow, and we're hoping that we get rid of this phenomenon where once you get within 2 seconds, you start losing effective downforce, the tyres go all over the place, they overheat, and then the Pirelli tyres of the previous era, once they start overheating, you lose grip, and then you have to just back off, and then that's done. So if it gets rid of that, so that at least people can get behind and have a sustained attack, I think we'll have really good racing. It might be a case of careful what you wish for, because they might just start breezing past each other, and then you're like, oh, I miss when there was a bit of aero wake and it was a little bit different. But maybe it'll be somewhere in between. I think most likely is that they won't have quite killed all the aero wake, and it might just be a bit easier to follow and race. And then we'll see. We'll see people using more driver skill and more racing skill. So that will be interesting. They're going to have to enforce racing rules much better than they did last year. And in fact, it wasn't just last year. It's been increasingly inconsistent over the last few years. I do remember them, suddenly being incredibly lenient to Charles Leclerc. Just very, you could see this inconsistency starting to creep in. So hopefully they've got that under control. But the thing that always excites me is the teammate battles. So people say, oh, it's boring if Hamilton's up at the front. It's boring if Vettel's up at the front and dominating. But there are 10 teammate battles that I just love picking a horse, basically, for all of those. And we recently did a show where we went through all 10 teams and forced everyone, pick a side. Who do you think will win? Who do you want to win, and why? And I think we've got some really interesting teammate battles. I'm really hoping that Ricciardo will turn up this season on a level playing field with Lando Norris because of the regulation change, and he's there, and show himself to be a bit more Daniel Ricciardo, because I think he can definitely be more of a challenge. And it would be nice if I was eventually proved right with my argument that I lost to Jolyon Palmer on checkered flag. So there's probably 5 drivers who took a long time to get going last season because they went into a car and it was difficult to go into a new car. So you've got Vettel. I'd really want to see Vettel just trounce Lance Stroll, because that would restore the natural order of things. 4-time world champion, billionaire kid who has only beaten Sirotkin so far. I think nothing against him. Seems like a nice lad. It looks like, I bet he asks politely when he's round your house, can I have a jam sandwich? I bet he's very polite, takes his shoes off. Sure, he's brilliant, but Vettel should be pounding him. I want to see Perez a bit more consistent. He was under pressure, came into Red Bull, initially a good start. They gave him a new contract. Then he had like 8 garbage races in a row. But there were signs, and there were signs towards the end of the season like, there'll be something here. Who else moved? Tsunoda. Really excited to see if Tsunoda can do anything as well. So yeah, that's what I want to see. I want to see those 5 drivers who struggled changing cars. What can they do? And to validate that argument that I've been making all of last season, that you can't quite judge those guys exactly the same as you normally would.
Yeah, absolutely. And I noticed that you mentioned about Perez and everything as well, and I'd like to see where you're putting yourself behind who you're supporting for this season. Now, obviously, I know you're a Hamilton fan and you like Perez, but
yeah, massive Perez fan as well.
Why on earth? Why Perez? What attracts you to Perez with regards to as a driver?
As a driver, I think he is smart, and it's not all about. He's not one of these guys who's like, I will go through a blazing ball of fire and I will crush everyone beside. No, he's a bit more measured. He treats it like a sport, and he treats the race as a whole entity. So you'll often see him at the beginning really picking and choosing his battles off the line, risk and reward, maybe sacrificing one stint for another stint, stuff like that. And I think he does play a bit of chess. I think he's a talented overall race driver. And in a previous era, I think where you didn't have so many complete drivers, I think you probably had less complete drivers on the grid 20 years ago, he would have shone through as someone who had like a master tactician. He's probably lacking a little bit on the ultimate pace and qualifying pace to maybe really challenge Verstappen. You don't always have to back the guys who are winning. I like the way he goes about things, and I like the way he goes about his business. Polite, respectful young man as well.
So he's the underdog then, the one that you cheer for, and just hope he has his day.
I just think, hope and he does. He does have his day. He does have his day a lot of times. You know what I mean? He's won 2 races with 2 different teams. He's scored multiple podiums. He's taken all those opportunities that Hülkenberg didn't take. And Hülkenberg is way more loved than Perez outside of Mexico. The amount of credit people give Hülkenberg, but he's never taken those chances. Perez in midfield cars has taken them. I remember him and Kamui Kobayashi suddenly just popping up on the front row of a grid. Kobayashi, there's another legend, but they were both good on the tyres as well. And it's just a bit more of a thoughtful sportsman driver than just a rah barge boy.
Okay. So who do you think is going to be the biggest improvement and disappointment of the season based on what we've seen so far, which is not?
Oh, okay. Biggest disappointment. Who's going to be disappointed? Mick Schumacher fans.
Yeah, I think now with the news of Kevin Magnussen, it's
so Kevin Magnussen in. So Mazepin obviously out and showing a distinct lack of a grasp of reality on social media and the new foundation he's started. People can Google that. I don't want to give that more thought than is absolutely necessary. But for Mick Schumacher fans, you go, that's it's a shame because he was obviously just going to pound him again. So then you have Pietro Fittipaldi lined up, who I don't think people fancy much either. So that would have been okay. But to have Kevin Magnussen coming instead is a bit of a blow. We are going to really see now whether Mick Schumacher is a genuine talent or not. Because Kevin Magnussen, for all his faults, for all the not quite taking the opportunities, he's legit. Him and Roman Grosjean were both, they weren't top drivers that won championships, but they were both legit talents up against each other and matched up to each other. Probably Magnussen the little edge and Grosjean just with his bizarre Grosjean moments, spinning in the pit lane, hitting people from behind at Spa. Apart from those moments where he seemed to snap out of existence for a moment, those two matched each other. And so a top driver now for Mick Schumacher, I think it's going to be too much. That's my prediction. I think it's going to be too much.
I think, yeah, that's solid. So improvement-wise, who do you think is going to impress us the most?
Perez. Okay, so apart from those 5 drivers I mentioned, I'm hoping that validates my theory with those guys. Team-wise, you've got to hope for Williams to take a step forward, haven't you? And I wonder now, with Williams, when they were being run by Claire Williams and Frank Williams, rest his soul, they were fiercely independent. So proud privateers, we ain't no B team. When they were struggling, you have to think that a closer partnership with Mercedes would have actually been smart. Let yourself Toro Rosso for a bit. Be a vassal state for a little while, and then overthrow the Duke or whatever they install. Overthrow the prince that they install at some point down the road. Perhaps Doralton, the new owners, maybe they're a bit smarter. Maybe they have got a bit of a working relationship with Mercedes. And as a complete guess, I'm only looking at the very similar cooling philosophies between the two teams. Williams have also gone very narrow with their bodywork and very slim. Is that a coincidence? Or is there some kind of, it only takes a few, they're not swapping shirts like allegedly was happening between Haas and Ferrari when Haas first joined. But, maybe they have a closer relationship. Maybe they go to some barbecues, in the off season last winter, and they go, slim might be better for these regs with the old ground effect. For me, if I was Doralton, I'd be cozying up to Mercedes to lift them up into the midfield.
Yeah, it could be like they could try and go down what Aston Martin are trying to do, where they start off getting close with Mercedes then branch out on their own. They were just coming out a few days ago saying that they might look at doing their own engine for 2026 or really kind of trying to become that constructor. So it's a long way back for Williams, but it would be great to see them fighting for podiums again. And
what's it going to cost you if you're Williams to get more chummy with Mercedes? Oh no, you're going to get a brilliant junior driver every now and then. That's hardly a heartache, is it? They've not suffered having George Russell on board for a little while and keeping him cozy, because he was meant to, really, they thought he might move on.
Yeah, no.
They thought he might move on a bit earlier, but, they ended up keeping Bottas and having Russell on board. And you have to think that kind of is indicative of a relationship. If you look at the Ferrari customer teams, with Giovinazzi being in Alfa Romeo a long time, and Haas having Mick Schumacher and the alleged wind tunnel and staff assistance they got when they first joined. Though those relationships exist, and if Toro Rosso and Red Bull can deploy 4 drivers against Lewis Hamilton on occasion, surely it's okay to have these vassal state teams for Mercedes as well. Ferrari have got them. If Ferrari are competitive next season, there will be the odd, or you can linger before you go on that pit stop, Schumacher, you don't have to totally get out of the way, at Monaco or something like that. So, yeah, why not?
Yeah, well, okay, I'd love to see that. But I think it's time now to stick a pin in our horse, or whatever the phrase would be, and decide on a champion and constructors champions. Who are you gunning for the championships?
Oh, yeah, boring. But I think Mercedes are going to absolutely smash it. I think they are going to salt the earth and blaze a trail through the lands. I think they want to hear the lamentations of their enemies' partners and see all crushed before them. I think they will have been hurt by 2021. There used to be in Mercedes, I think, an aversion to winning by too much, because it looked bad. I think they felt like this responsibility when they were dominant, and they would just manage the gap in the development war. Oh, we won by 10 seconds. Okay, we won't develop. Oh, they're getting a bit close. All right, let's get that front wing out that we designed ages ago and stick that on. I'm sure there was that kind of effect going on. They're not going to do that now. They don't feel any responsibility to anyone. If they come out with an advantage, I can see them just lapping the field.
I think it was actually been admitted by some people involved in Mercedes that when that new engine came out and they realised just how far ahead they were in 2014, that it was very much a case of don't run it at more than 80%. Otherwise they'll take the advantage away. So
there's that, and it will look stupid, and it will make the sport look stupid as well. That explains how they were able to kind of hang on, because I guess if they were in the olden days, Schumacher used to go and win by 10 laps, didn't he? Yeah, I don't think they'll do that this season, though. I think if they've got an advantage, I think they will stretch out and they will just lay the hammer down.
Well, I think now with the way the regulations are now, with almost the success ballast of the wind tunnel time and everything, it's already starting to affect the teams. If they got a big advantage, they're going to want to keep it for as long as possible, because you're going to have these other teams constantly creeping up on them with their extra resource, and it's not like they're going to be the most funded team anymore when you've got everyone else on the same budget and the infrastructure in place on these teams. And I can't see them just having an absolute dominant spell like 14, 15, 16.
And then, not for years.
No, I can't see that. I can see it maybe for a year, but if they are dominant this year, I can see next year it being a lot closer. Okay,
I'll make a prediction with Red Bull, though. They are going to be third or below.
That's basically what I've predicted as well.
Oh, is it?
I actually, however, I did predict Ferrari for Constructors Champions. I believe the winter hype.
No, every year, Tom. No, come on.
But this year, I actually believed it. But, now I've seen these new side pods.
I think it's possible they could be a distant second, and that McLaren could be up there. Just the worrying thing is the how overweight the Red Bull car is, because they didn't get surprised with that weight limit. That's as far as they've got. So, like I said, I've been involved in design for weapons in defence, and it goes through a lot of iterations. You have a prototype, concept, and then you have a B model. And then as you get closer, you're just having successive iterations until you get to a demonstration model that you'll then demonstrate. Customer finally goes, oh, that would be good, but could it go a bit faster? So you put a bit more fuel in at the end. Weight is one of the things that comes down in iterations, and it's one of the things that gets completely improved and designed through those iterations. For them to turn up, what was it, 20 kilograms heavy? Or 15 kilograms
something
heavy?
Like that, 10, 15, 20, something.
Yeah, it's a lot. That suggests to me that they're an iteration or two behind, and that they really did not change as early or put as much brain power into the 2022 car as maybe some of the other teams. Because they're obviously a talented design team, but they had to make a choice last season with the regulations changing and them being right up there. You couldn't blame them for saying, no, this is our best chance of picking up a title for the next few years and sacrificing 2022. And it just on the evidence of the car, that's the weight thing is the one that gets my design engineering bell ringing.
Yeah, I mean, they are obviously... They're crying out, not just Red Bull, but other teams are crying out for more, an increase in the weight limit because of the porpoising and I believe that haven't they?
Is it for the good of the sport? It'll be for the good of the sport, Tom. I know we've got to increase the weight limit for the good of the sport. It's a safety issue, is what it is. Yeah. It is a safety issue.
Yeah, but Alfa Romeo have managed to design a car that's under the weight limit, so just take some things off that make it go faster or run the ride height higher, then that'll get rid of the porpoising. You don't need extra weight limit for that. But hey, that's just my opinion there. But that's really enjoyed hearing about that. And where is it that people can find Missed Apex and anything you want to plug about the show? Any events coming up you want to talk about or?
Actually, I came on here. I wanted to plug my beat poetry. That's the thing I really... No,
if you want to...
I'm completely joking. Poetry's boring and pointless, and everyone who creates or consumes and enjoys it is weird and pretending that it's fine. Same with modern art, Tom. Missed Apex podcast, missedapex.net. That's the link to just find everything we do. But do come and follow me on Twitter as well, @SpannersReady. I do try and, have a laugh and a chuckle on there.
I've thoroughly enjoyed the chat today, and I really enjoy listening to your podcast. I think even with your success, you appear to be very humble as well. You're not going to be one of those people that stands in line saying, don't you know who I am? I shouldn't be standing in line. So very honest and funny podcast, and I fully recommend anyone to have a listen to it. So
I just want to be clear that if I ever get famous or ultra successful, mainstream media, whatever, I'm going to U-turn on that so hard. I am going to become arrogant, aloof, Like, you wouldn't see me just talking to just ordinary people in the street. No, I'll be the epitome of privilege. I can't wait. Like, I've got working class roots, but if I ever become like a millionaire, I will drop my working class roots so hard it'll create a hole in the ground, Tom.
Excellent. So if you've enjoyed this episode of Grid Talk, please consider supporting us on Patreon from as little as just $1. We are available on all major podcasting platforms such as Spotify, Amazon Music, Apple Music, Verbal, Omni Studio and Pocket Casts, as well as being available on the F1 Chronicle website as well. All our live review shows go out live on YouTube and straight after the event, and we have a post-show section where you can ask questions in the live chat. Just search for F1 Chronicle on YouTube and don't forget to subscribe. The next time you see us, the 2022 season will be underway, and we can't wait to see you there. So I just want to say thank you very much, Spanners, for joining us today.
Yo.
And thank you very much, and goodbye, everyone.